What's up, guys? It's Blaze here, and I just want to keep this video casual, to be honest. I spent the last month entering not my first game jam, but my first solo game jam. I want to make that perfectly clear. It's my first solo game jam, and I've actually come to the conclusion that throughout what I've been entering game jams for, I think, 5 years now. My very first game jam was in 2013. So I guess if you count this year, that would actually make it 6 years. But I've been entering game jams for a while now, and I try to make a point of entering at least 2 game jams a year. But of all of the times that I've entered them, this year, this just past March, was actually the first time that I entered by myself. So I've entered as a team of 3, 4, 5 members, but this was the first time that I actually entered a jam by myself. So everything was planned by me, and of course it gave me a bit of a better understanding as to where I am in terms of my skills as a developer, but more importantly, what it would look like if I were to develop a game by myself from the ground up, right from initial design through to sprite drawing or models, creating 3D models, all the way up to post-production and things like that. Of course, not everything finished or not everything went according to plan. In fact, I'll tell you guys now, I didn't get to finish the game jam, but I think for you guys who are thinking about what you should do in terms of being able to get more experience in games development, I think entering into game jams are a great way to do that. The main reason being because as as part of the rules of game jams, you're given a set time period to create something that's playable. It doesn't have to be finished, right? It doesn't have to be well polished, but it does have to be playable. Now, of course, a lot of people, something that turns people away from entering into game jams is self-confidence. Now, it's true, you might just be a beginner, and that's probably true for many people who watch YouTube tutorials or who enroll into Udemy courses, or if you're just studying at college or university. Yeah, it's true, you are inexperienced, and I mean, entering into game jams might seem to be a bit of a reach for you. However, if you've been trying game dev for maybe 1 or 2 years now, maybe you've been going at it for 3 years, I think at the 2 or maybe even 3 year mark, I think that would be a good time for you to actually see what you're capable of by entering into a game jam. Now, like I said, you can use it to get a better understanding of where you are in terms of your game development skills. In fact, when I entered my very first game jam as part of a team, we were all inexperienced. We were all in our first year, actually. But in that time, we learned how to communicate, how to develop ideas within a very short time period. I think the very first one that we entered was a 5-day game jam. And now that game development, especially indie game development, is much more prominent, there are literally tons of game jams happening almost every week. A good place to find different game jams, that's according to your personal time schedule and perhaps maybe even whatever engine or whatever framework you're using, is to go to itch.io. Now, I'm not being paid to tell you guys about it, of course. It's just something that I found while I was learning. Back then, of course, we only had the local dev community to hold these game jams. Of course, we called them we called the 48-hour game jam. You've got that one. That's quite big now. But back way back, that it wasn't so big a few years ago. Not a few years ago, but all the way back then it wasn't as big as it is now. So there are big ones, but if you go to itch.io and you go into the game jam sections, you'll notice that there are a ton of much smaller events, and probably some that are better suited to your skill level. Now, of course, if you don't feel confident, don't worry about it. Don't worry if you don't finish it. The whole point is to get a better understanding of where you are in terms of skill. So when I entered this composition, I knew that I lacked game design. Game development is different to game design. I knew that I lacked in the game design department, and so I wanted to focus on building up my game design skills. I knew that even though I had a month, I knew that I would not be able to finish. So in the first week of this, it actually started, I think it was the 3rd or the 4th of March. In the first week, I set about writing out my game design document. If you guys have never written a game design document before, I really suggest that you guys at least attempt to write one before, even if it's just for a game jam. At least write one down. The whole point of having this design document is to get all of your ideas on paper, and to see if it will work, at least from a very high concept level, right? Let me get my hand in the picture there. Get a good understanding of where your game could end up and how complex it actually is, because you won't actually discover until you start, and you don't want to start working on a game and then realize this is too much for me, right? You don't want to do that. So by writing a game design document, you can really filter out all that fat and just stick to the core elements of your game. And this is doubly important for game jams. So that was my first day. The second day was basically implementing in, very quickly implementing in the core aspects of my game. So for me, in this particular jam, I decided to go with Unity 2D, and I wanted to create an arcade platformer. Now, for some of you guys, maybe you've tried out Unity 2D and have thought, maybe Game Maker is probably a better idea. Why would I want to use Unity, which is primarily a 3D engine, for a 2D engine, for a 2D game? Yeah, a lot of beginners or a lot of people, even professionals, would say that, yeah, that's true. It's primarily 3D. Why would you want to do it for something else? The main reason being because I can type much faster. I can write my code much faster, and I actually have a stronger grip on the concepts of using Unity compared to Game Maker Studio. Even though this channel has a whole bunch of Game Maker tutorials, I'm actually more proficient in Unity and even more proficient in Unreal. But I think if I were to go with Unreal, even though I do have a new laptop now, uh, it's not quite friendly in terms of resources. I wouldn't be able to record it. I wouldn't be able to record and actually write code at the same time, or rather compile code at the same time. But that's for another day. Yeah, that was my first week, just getting basic gameplay done. The second week was getting mostly visual assets and getting them to work together in game. So my focus for this was to get at least one character working, which, I mean, if I were to say, I had most of the movement stuff done within the first week. So the second week was mostly visuals. Unfortunately, when life gets in the way, you gotta stop and you've got to say, hey, listen, I can't finish this. And unfortunately, second week of March is when I dramatically, by the end of the second week, things just slowed down a lot for me, mainly because of work. So if you're working full time and you want to enter into a game jam, make sure that you choose which one you're going to prioritize. I mean, if you're going to prioritize the game jam, make sure it's something that you can actually devote all of your time to. You might not think it's draining, but if you can imagine, you're building a functioning game with at least 75% of its features implemented and working properly within a very short time period. That is not ideal, right? If you're not putting all of your energy into it, you're basically throwing it away. You don't want to do that. So for me, unfortunately, by March, third week of March, I had to do extra hours at work, which meant that unfortunately I didn't get time to finish the game. So it's about halfway done right now. Most of the movement in the game, most of the things that you can do as a player is done. It's just I never finished. I never got to implement things like enemies. I never got to implement the attacking system or the actual core system that I wanted to focus on in terms of the game. Basically, the hook. I didn't get to refine that to a point where I was happy with it. I'm going to talk about hook in a separate, developing your game hook in a separate video. I think that deserves a, a very dedicated, or not exactly long, but it deserves its own video, is what I'm trying to say. Um, as for that, I think I learned a lot in terms of game design. While I did enter into it by myself, I had a few people talk to. I spoke with a few people, professional game designers in Tokyo. That's where I'm based. I'm not in Tokyo right now, but yeah, I spoke with a few acquaintances, few professional acquaintances, and they said, you know, if you want to develop a really interesting game for a game jam, it's best to stick with something you know. And so I said, okay, I'll develop a hook, a really unique hook for your game. And yeah, that's where I got that from. And I think it's if you guys want to get a good idea of where you are in terms of your developer skills, or where you want to focus on more, or where you can learn something more and fill in your knowledge gaps, entering into game jams are a really good way to expose them, and so that gives you an opportunity to build on top of that. um, Not to say that it's the only way. There are other ways for you to discover where you can learn more and fill in your knowledge gaps. But that's also entering into game jams is also a good way to fill your portfolio. You can show it off in. I mean, if you take a game jam game, polish it up just a little bit more, you can put that into your portfolio and say, hey, listen, I may not have professional experience, but I've entered into these game jams, and here's something that you can look at. These are completed. They're not commercial releases. That's true, but you've got industry experience, and you can prove it through the work that you've done with game jams. And hey, if that's a double bonus for you, if anything. So consider it. Think about it. Have a look on it. If you're like me and you want to develop, you don't want to spend too much time thinking of game ideas, I used a few game idea generators, but one I personally think it's really good is the YGD game idea generator. So I think that one for me is really good. I'll put a few links up for where you can find a whole bunch of game idea generators. Some will work better than others depending on who you are and what kind of game you want to make. And hey, go to itch.io and go check out and enter some game jams, because, like I said, you've really got nothing to lose from entering these. I think, if anything, you'll probably gain a lot more from entering into jams than just constantly watching YouTube videos or spending more money on the next Udemy course. By entering into these, you can get actual industry experience that you wouldn't otherwise have. But like I said, don't rush into it. Don't go into it thinking that, hey, I'm going to make this awesome game. No, be humble about it when you enter, right? Just say, okay, I don't have enough experience. I don't expect to finish it, but I do expect to learn something out of it. Go into these compositions with I want to learn something from it mindset, or at least I want to gain something of value for it. But hopefully that fills an interest that you might have, especially for those of you who might be um, bored with YouTube tutorials. You might want to do something more interesting. Try a game jam. Just try it. There's some that are 48 hours. There's some that are 1 month long. There's all different types out there. So hey, go check it out. You've got nothing to lose. Anyway, guys, that's all from me. At least that's all for today. We do have a special announcement coming up. We're working on something to show to you guys for a solo release, but I don't want to say too much about it. Just know that we are working on a game here. We're probably not going to release it under the name that of the channel. But yeah, just wait out for that.